Hi, it's Mark Owen from Moose Marketing and PR, the editor of Punchline magazine, and welcome to Punchline Talks, the business breakfast briefers, where each week I invite a panel of experts to go over the morning newspapers, find out what's going on in their own individual business and their own individual business sectors, and finally, what's caught their eye in this week's Punchline. If you like the show, please like, share and subscribe, and let me introduce you to the panel. So we've got Matthew Burgess, Principal of CEO of Gloucestershire College. They've got around 800 staff and a turnover around 35 million. We've got Jon McGinty, Managing Director of Gloucester City Council, responsible for around 15 million employees, 15 million turnover, not 15 million employees, 15 million turnover and 200 staff. We've got David Jones, Managing Director of Evans Jones, Chartered Town Planner, Chartered Surveyor, and we're currently working on a number of different video series called Reshaping the High Street. And we'll go off to Stroud Market soon, won't we, Dave? And then we have finally, my fantastic super sub, Sam Holliday. He's the ex-editor of the Bath Chronicle and development manager for the Gloucestershire and West of England Federation of Small Business. Welcome, guys, to Punchline Talks this morning. Thanks ever so much for making it. I'm just going to quickly rattle through the morning's newspapers headlines. The Western Daily Press, iconic pool saved from demolition. The Citizen newspaper, families donor plea for wonderful Auckland. The Times, jab results boost hopes for beating Omicron. The Guardian, blow for Starmer as biggest union backer cuts funding for Labour. The Daily Telegraph, a bruise for every day of lockdown. This is that terrible story of the little lad Arthur. The Daily Mail, why didn't they save Arthur? The Daily Express, Boris blast humbug, council Christmas brigade. The Daily Mirror, make your mind up on Christmas. Sun, did they learn nothing from Baby B? Again, it's about baby young Arthur. And the Daily Star, how Britain hit by shortage of Santas, £100 a day and no chance of the sack. The price of a Santa has gone up to 100 quid. Anyway, that's the Daily Star. Don't you just love it? Thanks ever so much for joining us. Let's start with you, Sam. What have you picked out from this morning's newspapers?
Sorry, I was just doing my application for a Santa, £100 a day. It's very good. Yes, Mark. I mean, as you pointed out, there's a lot about COVID again, and it's quite disappointing in a way because I'm not saying COVID ever went away, but it seems to be everywhere again. But I'm not going to talk about that. I'm going to talk about an article I saw in the Independent. It was a first-person piece. I went to a meeting, an actual face-to-face meeting in Bristol on Tuesday with TUC officials and various other business organisations talking about the staff shortage we've got in this country. And we used to talk a lot, and I know Matthew certainly will have done, about a skills shortage, but it's beyond that now. It's not just about certain specific skills. Everybody seems to be suffering from a staff crisis. And this article, let me read the introduction, just first paragraph. It says, staff at the care home charity I chair are talking going up to people in the streets and engaging passers-by, not to hassle them for donations or direct debits, but to ask them to consider coming to work for us to keep our business alive. The care industry is a sector which is really struggling for staff at the moment. And there's been various announcements this week by the government about what it wants to do about that particular sector. But it's indicative of what's happening in so many other industries at the moment. They just cannot get the staff. And it's not just about pay. A lot of people are offering very good salaries. Agriculture, we're finding this, but they just can't get the workers. And what was quite interesting in the debate I went to on Tuesday was you had people from retail saying, a lot of people from retail are leaving for hospitality. Someone from hospitality said, well, a lot of people are telling us they're leaving for retail. People aren't sure where everybody's going. Now, one thing I can say, obviously working for the FSB and seeing our membership and what's happening with it, a lot of new businesses are being created. Always happens in times like this. I think the last figure I saw was 750,000 new businesses were started last year. Remarkable sum when you think about what we've been through. So a lot of people might be considering going it alone, but there's a real dearth of workers. Now, for some jobs, that is a difficulty, but for the caring sector, that we're talking life and death issues here. If you haven't got enough staff to look after people, and I just read this because I just thought that's really indicative of what's happening. That's one sector, but I could name dozens of different sectors where they're really struggling for staff. And the problem was, sorry, Mark, the roundtable we had, nobody's come up with a solution yet. but it's out there. And I felt that was a really quite important article.
Well, Sam, no, thanks for picking it up. Every single business I talk to, it seems there's a shortage of staff. I was talking to Rachel Gallamassi from Stagecoach, and she was saying that obviously some of their drivers have been poached to go somewhere else, as you can imagine, to be lorry drivers. There's a shortage of Eastern European drivers who used to, do a fantastic job for the Stagecoach. So there's a real problem out there, especially in the hospitality sector, like you said. I tell you what I've noticed are boards advertising for jobs appearing on lampposts, especially for the care sector as well. That's something else. Have you got one more story very, very quickly, Sam? We'll wrap you up then and we'll move over to John.
Yeah, kind of another slightly worrying one, actually, from the Eye, had the Eye in the Times today. The price cap increase could double heating bills. This is talking about the fact that we have a price cap that was set by the government. That could go or be altered next year, and that's going to really affect not only individuals but businesses. And I was someone that I wanted to do something for the green agenda, so I switched my tariff from one of the big organisations to a smaller green company from Bath called Pure Planet that went bust. And as a result, I've now been put onto Shell Energy, and I've been waiting 2 months, and I don't know what I'm going to have to pay them, but I've got a feeling it's going to be horrible. Now, a lot of people are suffering at the moment, and when you see a headline like that, I think a lot of people, if fuel poverty is a genuine thing in this country, that's going to make people very nervous. So I've got my little heater next to me. No, not the whole house is being heated up. There's only me here at the moment. And we're all going to have to make these decisions at the moment. So for business as well as individuals, price cap increase, that could be very worrying.
The price of fuel going up for some businesses are absolutely going to kill them. And talking about obviously different members of society, and from cradle to grave, there's one man here on the panel that actually looks after us all. John, that's a very nice link. John, obviously Chief Executive of Gloucester City Council. John, what have you picked out for the papers, please, sir?
I've picked out a couple of stories, just picking up on Sam's point, though. I mean, the price cap is due to go up on the 1st of April next year. It's already, every company is already at the cap, and I suspect that's actually, we might be seeing the effects of this next winter, because during the summer people probably will turn their heating off if the bills are still rising, and they're talking about doubling from where they were a year ago. But next winter, there's going to be this choice of heating or food for many families, and it is going to be, if the energy prices don't sort of restabilize by then, I think 2022 is going to be a horrendous year in terms of that energy inflation. But anyway, the story I was going to talk about, just to keep everyone really cheerful, was to talk about the jab again. And this story about the Germans passing a law to ban unvaccinated people from from shops, from cinemas, and they can only, and then they're going to be banned from meeting more than 2 people from outside their household. Banned from pubs, restaurants, and they must take tests each day to use public transport to go to work. And I mean, the reason is not necessarily to talk about that, but just to sort of contrast that with what's happening in Britain. Different European countries, the standards, the way they're enforcing COVID is quite extraordinary, isn't it? I mean, Austria are talking about mandatory vaccines. And in Britain, as you've sort of highlighted on some of those front pages, we still don't know if we're allowing people to kiss under the mistletoe in the run up to Christmas. So there is such a contrast of approaches across countries as to how they're dealing with vaccination and COVID. It is quite extraordinary that these are close European neighbours and yet are acting so differently to us.
No, totally agree. Great story to pick out. As someone who is half German, there are sometimes a miserable bunch, though, aren't they? Anyway, by the way, I'll have to turn you down from kissing under the mistletoe, John. David, let's go over to you. Thanks, John. David, what have you picked out for the papers, please?
Yeah, morning, Mark. It's probably linked a little bit to Sam's comment about fuel prices. So this is from the Times. Call from the Climate Change Committee to increase the cost of gas to, encourage a lower carbon society. And, this comes on the back of, the government's announcements a few weeks ago to fund, air source heat pumps for homes. A completely foolhardy idea, in my opinion. Air source heat pumps don't work in 90% plus of British homes because they're poorly insulated, and it's all very well, carrot and stick, but with everything else which is hitting the fuel price indices at the moment, increasing VAT from currently 5% to 20% would be an absolute hammer blow to an already struggling arena. But equally, we do need to try and address climate change. So I think it's a rather sort of clumsy means of trying to encourage greater efficiency. And I think personally we should be looking at funding insulating homes rather than and saving energy through insulation rather than perhaps punishing people with the cost of fuel. So that's the first one. Second one, as you know, I do talk a lot about the high street and its issues, and the sections we've done recently on both the ice ring and the impact of markets in town centres. But Hammerson have announced far better than expected profits, which is good. They run some of the large retail centres across the country, reporting that footfall is back to around 90% of 2019 figures. So the signs are there. We're certainly not out of the woods yet, and there's certainly some underlying endemic problems within the high street that we still need to solve and resolve. But I think there are some good news stories, and certainly looking at Punchline and Superdry's new shop in the promenade, I think all echoes that, and certainly in town centres I'm seeing now a better pickup of vacant shops being relet. So I think there are some good underlying signs there, but there's still some underlying issues that we've got to resolve.
Oh, thanks very much for that, David, and thank you. It's a very nice link as well from the green agenda, what you were talking about, to Matthew Burgess, who's very keen to the college to turn it carbon neutral, isn't it?
Yeah, we've got a big scheme going on at the moment to become basically carbon zero within about a year, actually. So provided we can sort out planning at Gloucester, John, we'll be well away. So it's due
process, Matthew.
Yeah, so it's underway. It's a big scheme. A couple of ones to touch on, Mark, which actually kind of echo some of the things that people have already touched. I think John was talking about what's happening in Germany with COVID. It's been quite some really interesting things, I suppose, on the back of COVID in terms of the development of science. There was an article earlier in the week about talking about this new variant, that we could have vaccines in people's arms in 100 days. And at the beginning of the pandemic, we say like 10 years to come up with a vaccine. So there's some really interesting things, but you do feel we've moved away from listening to the science. All the discussions this week about can you have a Christmas party or not have a Christmas party, and the discussions with Theresa Coffey in the week saying it's okay to is it okay to have a snog at the Christmas party, basically, and she was saying I think it's okay if it's not a stranger, which is probably therefore okay for Matt Hancock and his aide. I guess that's why that one falls through. But I'm really interested now. Savage Javid said you can snog anybody as long as they have a negative lateral flow test. So I'm really curious what the science is behind all of this.
I'd like to know what the HR managers say about all this, actually.
I'm interested in the chat up line that involves a lateral flow test as well.
It is extraordinary. The other one, I'm going to echo the point this has come up, because I think it's the big point for business at the moment. There's an article here, it's actually in the Express, they're everywhere, but the eco car mechanics are in short supply. We need to have 70,000 by the end of the decade. We might have half of those. And there's an article in Sky News today. The UK has got a record 3.5 million job ads out. 3.5 million. And this is something we've been looking at. This is something that's happening globally, this phenomenon, something called the Great Resignation that is going on around the world. There's an article in the paper this morning talking about in the UK, household wealth over the COVID increased from something like 10.2 billion to 10.7 billion. So I think you've got this polarization during COVID. Some families very, very poor, very, very badly affected, being hit by energy prices and all the rest of it. But for lots of people who've been in work and not been going on holiday, they've been accumulating money. And that's causing, massive demand in the economy now, so everyone wants their, houses done up or cars or whatever it may be. But at the same time, people who hadn't been working have been reflecting on their life choices and what they want to do out of life. And people have been, walking away from careers saying, I want to do something else. And I think you then mirror that with the demographic changes that have been going on, which we know, and particularly marked in Gloucestershire, the number of the increase in the working age population compared to the increase in the retired population is just not fitting in. And certainly for us, this is our number one challenge at work, is getting staff with the skills to teach the employees of tomorrow. And if we can't get those staff, we're not going to be training people for tomorrow. So massive challenge that I recognise and echo. I've never in my career known a time like it. Never known anything like it.
No, I think you've explained that extremely well. Thank you ever so much for that, Matthew. And you're right. And lots of people are relooking at their lives, aren't they? If you have a number of relatives or friends that maybe have died and you haven't actually achieved what you want to achieve in your life, and you've got some money put aside, then you're going to reassess things, aren't you? You also, some people have had an awful lot of time in their hands to rethink, about their relationships. I was talking to Chris Price, of course, the amount of divorces going up. You've been cooped up with a partner all this time. Perhaps you finally realized that you don't get on as well as you thought you did, or like the grass is always greener somewhere else, or shiny shoes, as we call it in our family. I won't go into that. We won't go into that. But anyway, let's move on, as they say. Thank you ever so much for that. Great to have you on the show. Sam, let's go over to you, sir. The Federation of Small Business, you represent lots and lots of companies. You touched on there briefly. What else is going on in the sort of smaller business sectors?
Well, I think you'll probably see this as well, Mark. It's a bit of a confused picture, and in many ways, the stuff with Omicron it's kind of unsettled people again. As I hinted at earlier, I think this show's been going for quite a while now, and I would imagine if you played them all back, 70 or 80% started with a COVID conversation. Recently, not so much. We've kind of accepted it now. We've got the jabs, we've got the vaccinations. We're moving on. But it feels like there's been a bit of a setback in the last couple of weeks. And for a lot of small business, particularly in the retail sector, David is referring to, worst possible time. This was the run they wanted. This was a clear run to Christmas, get some money in the bank so they can get through what is always a bit of a tricky January, let's be honest. But this is kind of a set little bit back and nervousness. It's also got people talking again about the whole face-to-face thing. I mean, I met Mark last night at a face-to-face event, which was very well attended. And do you know what? That highlighted something, because I've actually been brought in quite late because somebody dropped out for today. But that wouldn't have happened if I hadn't met Mark at the face-to-face. And that's what you find. We can do all these things on Zoom, which are wonderful. But when you go to a face-to-face meeting, you have conversations away from the desk, if you like, away from the screen, and they develop. And that's what people are telling us. Small businesses are saying that they want to get out and meet people, but the Omicron thing has made people nervous again. And I just think it's a shame that when I picked up the papers today, apart from the horrible story about Arthur, it was COVID. Please, I don't not want to talk about it, but I do not want to talk about it, if that makes sense. Because I think I'm not saying we're over it, but I'm saying that businesses don't need it at the moment. They just need that clear run, as David was saying. And there has been some encouraging signs on the high street. That's really good. There's a couple in Punchline this week. I think Tops Tiles, I think they mentioned, Loungers, who I love their hospitality things, doing really well. So there are some good signs. There are some positive signs. We could have done without this because everyone was hoping for a really good run to Christmas, so we could start 2022 afresh. So nervousness, I think.
It's a bit like the run on the banks, isn't it? A bit like that, going back to the recession. It's all doom and gloom. Before you know it, it is actually doom and gloom. And this thing about office parties, the hospitality trade, if they don't get their money now, they're not going to be around in February or March. That's the real danger. And there are some great signs in the high street. That launch of Superdry was at the other day. And Gloucester itself is starting to really come along. There are some new shops opening, aren't there?
There are. It's a very exciting time. And as David was saying, in the high street at the moment, I just walking around Gloucester yesterday, I can see things picking up. We've obviously got the big opening of Primark next week. And that's already driven the opening of Jamaica Blue, the coffee shop next door to it. The top shop opposite Primark is being fitted out. I don't know who that new tenant's going to be.
I know who it is, actually. I'm running the story today. It's actually Shoe Zone.
Oh, wow, really? Okay.
They're moving from, here first, they're moving from the corner opposite Debenhams They're doubling the size of the store. They're taking on 2 extra staff, and the ones they've got are retained as well. That's our story today.
That's fantastic news. So, so there's that. There's a new Vietnamese food establishment opening next week on Westgate Street. So, yeah, there are really encouraging signs on the high street. Just funny, when Sam was talking about sort of Tops tiles, there was a story in today's Times on page 3 about a customer who had a cup of tea chucked on him for being the world's worst customer. By the shop assistant in Tops Tiles, and the shop assistant actually won his case for unfair dismissal because the judge deemed that, or the tribunal deemed that the shop failed to take account his need to sort of defend himself from the most abusive of customers. No, the thing I was just going to mention about Gloucester, if I've got a chance, is we got some great news published yesterday. I don't know if you saw it, about St Oswald's. There's the government. I mean, it's been a fantastic winter for Gloucester City Council in terms of government grants, with the Levelling Up Fund awarded for the University of Gloucestershire, the Fleece and the Forum projects. But yesterday, the government gave us a further 2.2 million for a brownfield land housing scheme at St Oswald's. So that's going to be 300 houses, 2/3 of which are going to be affordable, carbon zero, or as near to carbon zero as we can get, at that rear of St Oswald's, which has so far just been undeveloped, just behind the sort of park and ride behind the Tesco's. So it's fantastic news in terms of a large-scale housing scheme for Gloucester, obviously, but it's also, I mean, just picking up this general discussion, Gloucester's, for the 6 years I've been here, has been like a jigsaw. There's little pieces that just seem to come together. And some, the discussion about St Oswald's has been going on for as long as I've been here. Could we assemble this bit of land with that bit of land? These conversations have been going on between us and Tesco's and Hammerson's and other players for years and years and years. And then to actually see the pieces all come together and enable a great big housing scheme like this is just fantastic news.
Thanks so much, John. And yeah, that was our lead story today. You've just blown out, mate. So
sorry.
Luckily, it's all go out at the same time. Okay, thanks ever so much for that. And if you don't mind, I'll probably use some of the things that you've just said as a quote to go in it as well. Dave.
Yeah.
It's funny, we're talking back to the high street again, isn't it?
It always comes back to the high street, doesn't it?
Yes. And the jobs and everything else is going on. What's your overall view of things? Because I'm hearing that the landlords are now starting to seriously re-look at what they're charging and starting to be more considerate. Is that the case?
They are, but landlords are only one part of the equation, as we very well know, and there's still those underlying issues of business rates and taxation generally for retail versus online. So those underlying problems have not yet been really attacked or addressed. But I think the positives are that the retail core will shrink, and I think that's what we're seeing in most town and city centres now. So retailers are moving closer to the central core. I think that does give some opportunity for particularly with rates, lease rates dropping, for some independents to come back into the high street. I think we've all sort of bemoaned that homogeneous town centre where you don't really know where you are because they're all very much the same, with the same shops in every town and city centre. I think if we can get some independent retailers back in, then that can only be a positive thing. And but that's coupled with initiatives like the university going into Debenhams. As I sit on the Gloucestershire Design Panel, and we reviewed the initial plans a couple of weeks ago, and it's a really exciting scheme seeing that come forward, and that will drive footfall directly into the city centre, which will bring confidence amongst retailers to invest. So I think overall the signs are good and positive. Which I haven't always said that, but there are still those underlying bits that need to be resolved.
Thanks ever so much, David. It's good to hear that you're so positive about the high street as well. And there are some great signs. Signs. Julian Duckerton, invest in all that money into his new store. Decathlon opening in Cheltenham region, massive store. I was there the other day as well, hugely impressive. Anyway, thanks ever so much for that. We'll go over to Matthew. Matthew, let's have some news on Gloucestershire College. Last time I saw you, there was a massive drilling machine hammering away there. The MP for Cheltenham was there as well, Alex Chalk. We had a nice little video chat as well. You're moving to put some solar panels on top of Gloucester College as well.
That's right. So it's a complete scheme, Gloucester and Cheltenham, which will basically make us energy self-sufficient. So what a good time to be doing it. So it's a £5 million scheme. So in each campus in the car park, there are 40 boreholes to be drilled, 200 meters deep each for ground source heat pumps. I can't even fathom 200 meters deep. I thought we'd go to the center of the earth, to get the lava or something. It's just extraordinary. And the way it works, I've said before, the problem is so gas is really bad in terms of carbon emissions, but it's really cheap. Electricity is really good in terms of carbon emissions because the whole grid is going to be decarbonised in the next 10 years, but it's really expensive. That's the problem you have. So we have the kind of ground source heat pumps, but to actually then make the whole thing kind of stack up, we're buying loads and loads of solar panels to generate our own electricity. We've got kind of battery storage facilities, so thermal batteries, which will enable us to actually store the electricity that we generate overnight to operate the heat pumps, but also sell back to the grid the excess supply that we need. There's a whole new BMS system, building management system around artificial intelligence. So in theory, we have to finish this by March. That's the conditions of the contribution that we got towards the project. In theory, by then, once we switch all our electricity to carbon free, in terms of the emissions we're responsible for, we will be there. But it's quite a challenging project. I've got to be honest. It's quite different to doing a new build in terms of knowing what's involved. And also just at this time, working in the construction industry, for the first time in my career, I just remember studying this, I don't think it actually happened, had a supplier issue a force majeure notice. It's a supplier in China who were supplying our solar panels and basically said they couldn't get any container ships globally, so they couldn't fulfill the contract. Never knew anything like it. So we've been going around, not quite on eBay, but trying to find someone else who can, find £1 million worth of solar panels, which we have done. But it's certainly a challenging time to be doing big schemes like this.
Wow, that's fantastic. It's such an impressive scheme. But let me just quickly talk to you about the business side of the college itself. There's an awful lot of students. How many students do you look after?
So we've probably got about full-time students. We've probably got about 3,000. We've got about 1,000 and odd apprentices, maybe about 10,000 part-time students, 15,000 part-time. Most of it is in Gloucestershire, but we do little bits up in Manchester and London. We do quite a lot of interesting work on rail engineering. We do quite a lot of work in prisons. We're seeing some interesting things at the moment. I think on the kind of full-time education side, I think it's going to take us 4 or 5 years to fully recover from COVID. We're dealing with kids coming through with kind of lost learning, safeguarding issues from being pent up. All sorts of issues that are kind of going through. And the disruption to the exam system for the last 2 years makes things very difficult to compare. On the business side, we are seeing massive demand come through from employers, partly because I think there was a hiatus of a year in terms of apprenticeships during COVID, but also because the demand that's out there and people are now thinking to get staff, maybe I'll take on an apprentice because I've not been successful doing something else. So that's good in one way, but it's certainly causing us challenges. And we also know there's the kind of demographics coming through in the next, certainly in Gloucester and Cheltenham in the next 2 or 3 years, there's going to be sizable additional students, coming through. And I can imagine the types of areas they're in. So we're working up some bids to expand capacity around construction, looking at renewable energies, those kinds of things, as you can imagine. And we've also, one of the teams in the college has just won a government contract to do HGV driver training, intensive HGV driver training courses. So we are endeavouring to support the skills needs, but it's tough. Yeah, it's tough. And it's that old thing, Mark, as you can imagine. The area that people want to train in are the areas where there's good salaries, and there's good salaries are normally there because there aren't enough staff in the industry. And therefore, catch-22, we can't find the staff to train them. You know, always that way, isn't it? We can find the staff where actually demand isn't there. But it's particularly a bit of a challenge at the moment. But we'll get through it. We'll get through it. It's an exciting time. You know, the next few years are going to be really, really interesting. I think really interesting.
It's funny what you said. You know what John said earlier as well about the missing piece in the jigsaw. A lot of people don't realise that without Gloucestershire College being exactly where it is on the side of the canal, there would be no Gloucester Quays, there would be no Gloucester Quay, there would be no regeneration, there would be no docks revival, all that side of things. And that all stemmed from the college closing down in Brunswick Square, isn't it, really? Which we've got to take a hats off for that very forward thinking. Right. And I know you were part of that.
Yeah. 2007 we moved. We were the anchor tenant for the scheme, and I suppose I can say to John, the change I've seen in Gloucester over that period is just phenomenal for the good. It really is transformed, absolutely transformed it from where it was, and I think it kind of competes well now with other towns, which is great. It's been great.
No, thanks ever so much for that, Matthew. Right, guys, we're going to have to rattle through what's caught your eye in this week's Punchline, please. I'm going to start with David. David, what's caught your eye in Punchline this week, please?
I think it's the 30-year Pied Piper celebrations. Fantastic charity, and great local charity, and great to see them continuing their great work.
Thanks very much. Sam, what's caught your eye in this week's Punchline?
Yeah, we've already alluded to it. We did a piece earlier in the week about the Christmas party and how it might affect Gloucestershire and hospitality. And the message is coming through from your commentators is, look, even if you don't have that big party, you can still have a small party. You can do it safe. You can have fun. And if you can avoid kissing Sajid David, it's a bonus. But that's a good piece. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much. John, what's caught your eye in this we's Punch?
Well, my dog and I, as you can hear in the background, really interested in the article about the TSB branches shutting in Cirencester and Ross-on-Wye, and all the other branches, Thursley, Hucklecote, Bishopscleeve, Cinderford, Wootton, that have closed over the last year. And there's a comment from you at the bottom about the danger to communities from those people that depend on cash. But on the same day that you published that, the BBC published an article about how there's a pilot going on for retailers to give out cash without requiring a purchase. I'm just wondering whether that's going to be a sort of societal change, that bank branches are going to carry on closing, but retailers are going to turn into banks effectively.
The big thing there is dangerous. People can't carry big loads of cash and put it into their bank, or have to go a long way to cash that money. They put themselves in danger.
The retailer's pilot is interesting because you don't have to withdraw in multiples of 5 or 10. You can take out £3.50 or whatever's in your account.
No, but it's putting money in, paying money in. So they've got cash at the end of the night. They can't.
Absolutely.
Matthew, what's caught your eye in this week's Punchline, please?
Again, the Pied Piper. That's great. They've been a sport of theirs for some time, so that's great. The one that I pick out though is the Prithvi restaurant in Cheltenham being crowned the best restaurant in the southwest in the British curry Oscars, which is fabulous. It's not one I've been to. I'm going to visit there. And also the Vietnamese place that John mentioned on Westgate Street. I shall certainly be there. And as Boris only can, his comment is to support, we're not just building back better, we're building back Balti.
And that is really the perfect place to end. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining Punchline Talks. If you like the show, please like, share, and subscribe. And we'll see you all next week. Thank you. Bye.